The night cracked open with a scream that ripped through the silence, startling Emma from her fragile sleep. Her heart raced as shadows swallowed her dimly lit apartment, and dread clung to her skin like smoke. She whispered, "It can't be happening again." Her mind clawed through the fog of memory, replaying years of humiliation, betrayal, and isolation. She thought of her working-class childhood, her parents' constant reminders of her insignificance, and her colleagues' whispers that she was never good enough. She pressed her palm against the cold window. The city below blurred with rain, neon lights streaking like broken dreams. The scream echoed within her, awakening not just fear, but a realization. Her silence had trapped her for too long. Tonight was not just another night. It was the breaking point, the start of something she could neither control nor avoid. Emma whispered again, "If I don't leap now, I'll be swallowed forever." The air felt electric, the kind of tension before a storm. The city outside was alive with noise, yet inside her apartment, silence clung like a suffocating blanket. Emma thought about her father's words, "You'll never rise above your place." Those words cut deeper than any betrayal. She longed to fight back, but fear wrapped her tighter than chains. The scream had reminded her that survival meant more than blending into shadows. It meant confronting them. Her reflection in the window mocked her, a ghost of someone who had given up too many times. Yet deep inside, a flicker remained. She whispered, "Not this time." The world would not notice her absence if she stayed silent, but if she chose to leap, perhaps it would finally feel her presence. Emma paced the room, her bare feet brushing against discarded papers, each bill and rejection letter whispering her failures. She could hear her colleague David's cynical voice, "You're too cautious, Emma. Take risks or fade away." His words stung but carried a truth she feared. The walls felt too small, suffocating her, each shadow pressing closer. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. She had been invisible for too long, a background figure in her own life. Tonight, she felt the rising urge to claw free, even if it meant breaking apart first. The apartment seemed to breathe with her, each creak and hum echoing her unrest. Emma stared at the cracked photo frame on her desk, her younger self smiling beside parents who never believed in her. That girl had dreams, but those dreams had been buried under years of doubt. She whispered, "What happened to you?" The photo seemed to mock her, a reminder of promises broken. Her chest tightened, but beneath the ache, something unfamiliar stirred. Anger. She realized anger was not weakness but fuel, and maybe it was time to burn away the old chains. Emma collapsed into her chair, her body trembling from the weight of her thoughts. She imagined David saying, "The world won't hand you freedom, you have to seize it." She hated his bluntness, yet needed his truth. The storm outside roared louder, lightning briefly illuminating her hollow room, her lonely figure cast in fragile light. Her mind screamed with the choice, remain unseen or finally leap. She clenched the armrest, whispering, "I choose." In that whisper was a seed of defiance, fragile but alive. For the first time in years, Emma felt not just fear but possibility. Dawn rinsed the night from the streets while Emma watched buses hiss through puddles. She counted her breaths, and the city counted its dollars. She said, "Walk in, hold ground, speak plain." Her phone buzzed with a message from David. David said, "Stop hiding behind perfect. Ship it messy." She grimaced, yet the words steadied her spine. A gull tore the sky like a sharp thought, and she envied its directness. She remembered school halls where praise slipped past her like light through bars. She said, "Today, I refuse the background." The old fear stirred, asking for one more day of silence. She answered, "No deals with fear." The bus arrived, doors folding like a verdict. She stepped on and held the railing as if it were a vow. The city rolled forward, and she let it pull her with it. The office lobby hummed with polished shoes and half-truths. Emma passed the reception desk and caught the thin smiles that never reached eyes. She said, "Good morning," and the elevator replied with a mirrored doubt. On her floor, whispers rose like gnats. A manager flagged her with a stack of files. he said. Tight deadline, no errors. She felt the old script press against her tongue. David drifted by and said, "He means hurry, not perfect." She nodded, heat climbing her neck. She wanted to run, yet her feet stayed loyal to the carpet. She said, "I will deliver, and I will be heard." The words surprised her with their weight. She set the files down and opened the first with careful defiance. The room kept buzzing, but her mind sharpened to a point. Wind scoured the rooftop and flapped a torn banner like a restless thought. Emma stood at the ledge, city heat lifting in waves. She said, "I am tired of apologizing for breathing." David joined her with coffee in silence. He said, "Fear is a habit, not a prophecy." She let the words land, heavy, yet oddly kind. She said, "What if I fail in public?" He said, "Then you fail in proof, not rumor." A siren stitched the blocks together below. She felt the thread tug at her ribs. She said, "I want to own my voice." David said, "Start with one true sentence in the meeting." The wind shifted, clearing the haze. She held the cup and a new line formed in her mind like steel cooling. She said, "I will open with the risk we avoid by pretending." Back at her desk, Emma unfolded a childhood report card she kept like a splinter. The teacher's praise glowed, yet the margin note from home echoed colder. She said, "You did fine, but fine was never allowed." Memory flickered to a small kitchen where judgment wore work boots. She said, "Silence was our family grammar." She pressed the paper flat like smoothing a scar. David pinged her a draft outline. He said, "Use this spine, then add your bite." She breathed in and let the old voices drain like static. She said, "I choose clarity over approval." The copier hummed a steady metronome. She wrote a single heading that felt like a door, "Risks we refuse to name." She felt the hinge swing in her chest. She said, "I am walking through." Evening settled like ink as the office emptied. Emma stayed with the hush and the hum of vents. She said one true sentence, then another. She sketched a slide that named the hidden cost of silence. David paused at the doorway. He said, "Lock the fear outside when you stand up." She smiled without softness. She said, "I will lock the door from the inside." He left a nod behind him. The storm from last night felt distant, like weather from an old life. She practiced her opening until it fit her mouth. She said, "Good morning. Let's start with what we avoid." The words felt clean, spare, and earned. She shut the laptop and held the rooms quiet like a medal. The meeting began with a shuffle of papers and a hum of the projector. Emma felt the weight of every gaze, her throat tight but her spine unbending. She whispered, "Start with truth." Her first slide exposed hidden costs of silence, missed deadlines, wasted funds. Murmurs rippled. A senior manager frowned, his voice sharp. "This is not on the agenda." Emma steadied her voice. It should have been years ago. For the first time, the room stilled because of her, not despite her. David leaned back, smirk barely visible, as if daring her to keep going. The old fear clawed at her ribs, but she pushed forward. She said, "Pretending risks nothing but costs everything." Silence stretched, fragile and electric. Emma's slide advanced, numbers bleeding red like wounds. Whispers sharpened, but she locked eyes with her critics. She said, "These figures are proof, not opinion." The manager tried to interrupt, his tone dismissive. "Ow." David muttered under his breath, "Don't flinch now." Emma steadied, her palms damp but her voice clear. "I won't bury this truth any longer." She remembered her father's voice saying she was too fragile, and she answered him across years, "I am not fragile. I am fire." The room leaned forward as her words cut through the hum of machines and breathing. For once, the silence wasn't dismissal. It was attention. By lunch, the meeting dissolved into fragments of debate. Emma sat alone at the cafeteria corner, her tray untouched. Fear whispered, "You went too far." She gripped her cup as if it were an anchor. David dropped his plate beside hers. He said, "You lit a fuse. Don't smother it now." She frowned. "What if it burns me down?" David smirked. "Then at least you'll be seen in the fire." His bluntness scraped but sparked something. She imagined flames clearing years of shadow. Emma said, "Then let it burn." For the first time, she felt danger not as threat but as fuel. The hallway outside buzzed with gossip. Emma caught fragments: reckless, bold, career suicide. Each word stung, but also rang like proof that she'd made a mark. She paused by a glass wall, watching her reflection shimmer against the skyline. She whispered, "Better reckless than invisible." David brushed past, muttering, "They'll test you harder now." She nodded, pulse steadying. The whispers no longer drowned her, they amplified her defiance. For the first time, she felt the walls of the office not as cages, but as battlegrounds. She squared her shoulders, ready for the next strike. Evening bled into the office as lights dimmed. Emma sat at her desk, exhaustion heavy, but her spirit alive. She said, "For once, they cannot unhear me." She remembered the hush after her words, the pause that held weight. David stopped by on his way out. He said, "You started something. Don't let it die in the dark." She nodded, her hand hovering over unfinished notes. She whispered, "I won't." Outside, the storm returned, lightning slicing the skyline like a reminder of battles yet to come. But this time the thunder felt like applause. The email hit before sunrise, a thread stuffed with blame and red exclamation marks. Emma read the subject twice, feeling the floor tilt under a quiet wave of dread. The manager wrote, "Your slides damaged client trust," and copied half the floor. Her pulse skittered, yet her hands stayed on the keys like anchors in rough water. She said, "Facts are not sabotage," but the words looked thin inside the glow. Someone had edited her numbers after midnight, and the timestamps looked clean. David pinged, "Hold your ground, collect proof, then speak," and vanished for a call. She opened logs, screens a maze of cells, formulas, and hidden sheets like traps. She said, "If I fold now, they will file me under silence again." The cursor blinked like a metronome for courage, steady and indifferent to fear. She began a list labeled, "Evidence I can stand on," and breathed in through steel. In the glass meeting room, the manager arranged papers like weapons on velvet. He said, "Your tone in the meeting was reckless," and smiled without warmth. She felt the old script rise, the one that begged to apologize and vanish softly. She said, "My tone named risks we were hiding," and her voice did not tremble. He tapped the altered spreadsheet and said, "Own this or we escalate to RR." The room throbbed with the hum of vents, every light a small interrogation lamp. David entered late, set a notebook down and said, "We will verify the edits." The manager sighed, excuses, and dismissed them with a flick of his pen toward the door. In the hallway, panic pounded like fists on a locked door inside her chest. David said, "You want an easier story than the truth, but there isn't one." She closed her eyes and nodded, choosing pain over the soft comfort of retreat. She said, "Then we verify, and I stand in the room until they see it." It wrote back with a shrug of protocol. Retention windows trimmed the midnight trail. Emma felt a hollow open, like a stair that ends where a door should be. She said, "They will say I invented ghosts," and the words tasted like rust. David scanned exports, saying, "Find the mismatch the edit forgot to mimic." She chased discrepancies through backups, decimals out of step like limping feet. The clock moved without pity, and the room dried her eyes into ashen grit. She whispered, "I cannot outrun this tide," and the chair squeaked in agreement. David said, "Then stand where the tide must break, and call it by its name." She found a comment thread whose author tag changed after the supposed edit time. It was small, stubborn, and sharp, like a nail in the sole of a polished shoe. She said, "This cut will bleed," and saved screenshots into a folder called Light. For a breath, despair loosened, and resolve sat down where fear had been. HR summoned them for morning, toned cordial as a locked window on a high floor. Emma printed her notes, the paper hot and thin, a flimsy shield with a hard edge. She said, "I will enter with questions, not apologies," and stapled each page twice. David said, "Led with the mismatch and the author tag, then stopped talking." The advice felt like a rope, rough and strong, cutting her palms into focus. She opened a resignation draft, read it like a map back to the old country. The subject line blinked, promising safety and erasure in equal parts of dust. She selected all, pressed delete, and watched the blank page refuse to grieve. She said, "If I leave now, the lesson leaves with me," and closed the window. Rain freckled the glass, soft percussion steadying the drumline in her chest. She packed her folder and a small courage. She would not lend to doubt again. David texted, "Sleep," and she replied, "I will face it awake." Night pooled in the apartment, power flickering like a tired heartbeat on a screen. Emma laid her pages on the table, each sheet a plank in a narrow bridge. She said, "Control the choice, not their judgment," and felt the words take root. Thunder rolled, not cruel but vast, a drum reminding her that fear is only weather. She rehearsed the opening, then the silence after, practicing how not to fill it. She wrote one line on a card, truth without anger, courage without apology. The room settled as if agreeing to hold her, not gently, but without lies. David called and said, "You are ready enough, the rest you earn in the room." She smiled into the dark, small and fierce, and placed the card on top. She said, "I will go as myself, and I will not trade me for safety again." The storm eased, leaving rain that sounded like steady breath on glass. She turned off the light and kept the decision lit where it mattered. The HR boardroom was colder than the rain outside, polished wood reflecting sterile light. Emma laid her folder on the table, hands steady though her chest burned. A senior executive said, "We question your judgment," his tone clipped like scissors. Emma inhaled. "My judgment was naming the risk you prefer hidden." Their faces stiffened, irritation rising like steam from sealed pipes. She opened the log evidence, pointing to the author mismatch. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Another voice said, "If true, this is serious." Emma said, "It is true. And you knew." The room shifted, power lines sparking as truths pressed against denial. David sat at the back, silent, his stare like a hand on her shoulder. She felt the fear crawl but chose not to feed it. She thought, "This is not rebellion. This is survival turned outward." The manager leaned forward, his voice a blade dulled by arrogance. He said, "Evidence can be shaped." Emma's voice sliced back, "But timestamps cannot." She dropped the screenshots, each print a nail hammered into denial. A hush carried across the room. Executives scanning, brows folding into suspicion. One muttered, "This changes the risk picture entirely." The manager shifted, sweat beading, and said, "She is twisting facts." David finally spoke, blunt as stone, "She is not twisting, she is untangling." Emma felt the weight of his words buttress her stance. She thought of her father's kitchen, the silence where truth once drowned. "Not this time," she said. "The risk you fear is not my voice, it is the rot I've exposed." By afternoon, rumors spread faster than truth, hallways buzzing like wires in a storm. Co-workers whispered, "She's reckless," and others whispered, "She's brave." Emma walked through the current, head high, though every step dragged her past the echo of judgment. David walked beside her, muttering, "Attention means they can't erase you." She said, "Then let them see." They stopped at the break room, where a group fell silent. Emma poured her coffee slowly, each motion deliberate, refusing to shrink. One voice broke the air. She found what others hid. The words felt like a small lantern in the fog. Emma didn't smile, but her chest eased, as if the air finally remembered how to fill her lungs. Emma sat at her desk, the hum of computers rising like distant surf. Her inbox overflowed with both warnings and quiet thanks. An anonymous message read, "You said what we never dared." She exhaled, shoulders loosening under the strange weight of being heard. David passed by, tapping her desk lightly. He said, Storms reveal cracks, but also openings. She looked at her notes, each line a scar and a seed. She whispered, "I will not close the door I opened." Outside, thunder cracked again, but she heard applause beneath it. For the first time, her silence was not absence. It was choice. That night, Emma returned home, city still wet from the day's storm. She dropped her bag on the floor and sat at the window. The rain streaks mirrored her own lines, carved by years of doubt. She whispered, "The truth has teeth, but I still have my voice." She thought of the faces at the table, the whispers in the hall, and the email that had tried to bury her. None had silenced her. David had said once, "Failure in the open is better than silence in the dark," and tonight she understood. She pressed her palm to the glass and said, "I am not invisible anymore." The city lights blurred, but her reflection stood clear. The boardroom brimmed with tension as senior leaders gathered. Emma's evidence lay stacked like quiet grenades. A director said, "We must decide tonight." She rose, steady, her voice carrying, "The risk is not my defiance. It is the silence you protect." Gasps cut through the room. The manager shifted, jaw tight, sweat beading. David leaned forward, eyes sharp. Emma thought, "This is the moment fear loses its grip." The manager snapped, "You are undermining authority." Emma's chest tightened, but she answered, "I am restoring integrity." The words struck like thunder, shocking even herself. Silence cracked, and one director whispered, "She's right." David's faint smirk said more than approval. It was confirmation. The manager slammed his pen, but the room no longer bent to him. Emma thought, power shifts when truth refuses to bow. The debate swelled, voices rising like storm waves. Emma remained still, letting the noise crash around her. She raised her hand, and the room fell quiet. She said, "You fear exposure more than failure. That is the true rot." One executive asked, "And if we resist?" Emma met his gaze, "Then the cost will be written in your silence." David's eyes burned with pride. She thought, "This is not defiance, it is deliverance." The manager stood, trembling with rage. He barked, "You will regret this." Emma stepped closer, unshaken. "No," she said. "I regret every year I stayed silent." Her words struck harder than any threat. The room froze, as if history had pivoted in that instant. David's voice carried, "Truth has spoken. The question is, will you listen?" Emma felt her chest rise, no longer weighted by fear. She thought, "This is my leap." The storm outside roared, thunder rattling glass. Inside, silence reigned. One director finally spoke, "We will investigate." Emma exhaled, her voice calm, "Do more than investigate, change." David touched the table lightly, his way of saying, "You won." Emma gathered her notes, spine straight, fear dissolved. She thought, the world does not end when you speak. It begins. The thunder outside echoed like applause. The dawn after the storm painted the city in pale gold, glass towers dripping with light. Emma walked to the office, steps firm, the streets humming with ordinary life. She thought, "Yesterday I fought shadows. Today I walk in my own skin." Passing through the lobby, she caught reflections that no longer looked like a stranger. David stood near the elevator, coffee in hand, and said, "Still standing." She smiled, "Still myself." The elevator doors opened, carrying her forward not as a passenger but as someone who had claimed her ground. At her desk, the screen flickered awake with a flood of emails. Some were sharp with accusation, others soft with gratitude. She read one that said, "You made us braver." Her chest tightened, but this time it wasn't fear. It was recognition. David leaned on the partition and said, "Truth multiplies when spoken." She said, "Then let it keep spreading." The storm had not ended the struggle, but it had redrawn the lines. She thought, "I am not hidden anymore. I am visible, and that is enough." Later, she stood before the same conference room glass, watching the skyline. Once, It had felt like a wall pressing her into silence. Now it looked like a horizon, open and waiting. She whispered, "I walked through fire and stayed whole." David joined her quietly, his voice low. "You were never broken, just buried." She nodded, a small tear escaping not from weakness but release. She thought, this is what it feels like to reclaim breath that was always mine. That evening, Emma walked home beneath skies brushed in crimson and violet. Her steps carried not exhaustion but momentum. She thought of the girl in the photo frame, smiling with untested dreams. She whispered, "You can rest now. I carried us through." The streets were alive with chatter and headlights, yet she moved with calm clarity. David's words echoed, "Failure in the open is better than silence in the dark." She smiled, knowing she had chosen the harder path and survived. Back at her apartment, Emma lit a single lamp and placed the handwritten card on her desk. Truth without anger, courage without apology. She whispered, "I am not invisible. I am alive." The storm had passed, but its thunder still lived inside her as strength. She leaned on the window, city lights steady below, her reflection no longer fractured. For the first time, she didn't crave approval. She only needed her own. The silence wrapped her not as prison, but as peace.